This was our project at the end of the last video. We had mounted the monitor in the lid of the case using maker beam struts and hinges. While these worked well and allowed access to the back of the monitor, it did have the disadvantage of taking up nearly all of the case's lid. So we're going to rework this to allow more free room in the case. So in addition to remounting the monitor within the case itself, we're going to have to get power into the case. So what I'm going to do is to drill a small hole in the side of the case here, and we're going to be using one of the mains cables, which is provided by Odroid. This optional accessory gives you a barrel jack connector at one end and two bare connectors at the other. The bare connectors I'm going to connect to a barrel jack socket, and this will go in the side of the case, just around here. This will allow us to power the case with one of the standard 15 volt power supplies from Odroid. So let's have a look inside this case. So if we have a look inside this case, we will see that we have now repositioned the monitor in the lid. I've managed this by using magnetic tape. As we've done in previous videos, we've used this type of magnetic tape to fasten the lids to the top of maker beam cases. As you will see here, the existing maker beam struts which I'd screwed to the top of the lid now have a magnetic strip running down their length. And on the back of the monitor, we now have two magnetic strips to match up with these. This allows the removal of the standoffs to the back of the monitor and also the maker beam strut and hinge. This gives us considerably more room inside the lid of the case. And the monitor fits quite nicely into this. One of my next tasks will be to source appropriate cables to go to the USB and also the HDMI. The HDMI cable that ships with the monitor is exceedingly too long for this particular case, but it will do to demonstrate how this all works. Additionally, down in the corner here we've actually mounted in the barrel jack socket to allow power to go into the Odroid. As you can see quite happily here. So now that we have the Odroid mounted, the screen mounted, and we can now look at routing cables and putting a cooling system in place. I have sourced two of these small Noctua 40mm fans. The intention is to have one of these as an intake and one to suck the air out of the case. The computer will only be operated when the case is open. Now that we have the monitor sunk back into the lid, it allows us space to fit in the keyboard. The keyboard can sit here when the case is closed, and then when the user wishes to use the unit, we can take the keyboard out, unfold it, and it's a Bluetooth keyboard, so it will work wirelessly. I've ordered up some HDMI ribbon cable. This should allow us to route the cable from the monitor through the lid, which we've yet to print, down into the case itself to plug in to the HDMI socket in the Odroid. With the cabling tidied up, this should allow us to mount our intake and extract fans, one at this side and one down here. The final stage of the project will be to design a lid which is going to cover the Odroid itself. As this is a pirate case, my intention is to use a gold coloured PLA filament to 3D print a lid which looks like gold coins. As you will have seen in previous Odroid videos, there are two Ethernet ports that will allow us to connect to the internet. However, for this particular module I'm going to be using Wi-Fi, and I've sourced one of these small Wi-Fi dongles. This is not only Wi-Fi, but it's also Bluetooth. So this should allow us to communicate both to Bluetooth devices, for example the keyboard, and the internet on our Ethernet connection. And this will only occupy one of the USB ports. A second USB port will be used to power the monitor. The only additional cabling we're going to need is a Y-splitter for the fans. the Odroid board has one socket at the side here for our system fan. So we'll use a Y splitter to plug in two fans. It will be interesting to see whether these two fans can keep the Odroid itself cool enough to run without throttling. So let's plug in our power supply and see if the unit boots up correctly. Right, our power supply is plugged in. Let's just hit the power button and see what we get. And there we are, starting to boot up now. So the connections seem to be fine, and we're booting into Windows which are pre-installed on the M2 SSD. And as always, Windows is now doing some updates. And there we are, now booted in to Windows. So everything seems to be running fine. So all we need to do now is to wait for our cables to arrive so we can complete the cabling. This will allow us to do some testing on the cooling and also to design the 3D printed lid for our case. However, that's it for today. Thank you for watching.